Welcome to Enchanted Astrology with Ariel Smith as we take a look at the astrological forecast for the week of February 4th until February 10th. And this week is about us outgrowing the status quo. We are outgrowing stories, outgrowing identities, outgrowing emotional contracts that used to serve us, used to make sense as part of our journey, but that is no longer the case. Now, at the beginning of this week, we still have all of our personal planets commuting through the sign of Aquarius, and Aquarius is always about outgrowing the status quo. Aquarius can see the entire system and that it no longer fits inside of it. So this is a very future facing week, as Aquarius is a future facing sign. And it's about aligning with new systems, new connections, and new ways of being that are actually now reflecting who you are in the present, not who you were in the past. And the guide this week as this journey unfolds is this Jupiter retrograde in Cancer. So Jupiter direct typically has more of an outward expression of teaching and sharing truth and these public belief systems or shared narratives. Jupiter direct has to do more with external meaning and external validation. But Jupiter retrograde functions much more internally. It's more the yin expression of Jupiter. It's your internal belief. It is a personal and private meaning for yourself. That meaning does not need external validation. It does not need any mass consensus. It doesn't even need explanation. And that is Jupiter more in a Pisces mode. So Jupiter retrograde is about withdrawing our belief from external structures and returning it back into our internal source. And this week that is happening very intentionally because right now with Jupiter retrograde in Cancer, the belief systems that are being dissolved are these emotional belief systems that are tied to memory. They are tied to our attachments and our sense of belonging. They're tied to our core emotional identity that are formed from family narratives and stories of what we told ourselves of the meaning of being safe. And Jupiter retrograde is focusing on these emotional beliefs that we live inside of and don't question. And we don't even realize that we don't question them. We just take them for truth. And so these stories about how we stay safe, how we love, where we belong, we are reorienting around this now in a new way. It's very subtle, it's very deeply internal. And it's about releasing this internal narrative. As an example, my sister and I have very recently uncovered some deep seated emotional beliefs and stories that have entirely affected our sense of safety and belonging, and these affect our ancestral line. These are ancestral beliefs that have been passed down, and this causes us to now reorient to an entire new belief system and an entire new sense of safety. And it's one of those things where when you see it, you can't unsee it. It becomes so obvious and so apparent to how it's built your framework, to how deeply it's affected you and your belief system, your family's belief system. And it can be incredibly releasing to finally uncover that. Now, earlier this week, Mercury and Venus in Aquarius each formed an in conjunction to Jupiter retrograde in Cancer. And in conjunctions work to dissolve. So we have these two realities that cannot be integrated, and something has to give, something has to soften or dissolve here. So Mercury and Venus in Aquarius were challenging these old emotional beliefs, these old attachments, these old value systems, and it likely felt like, confusion about what it is what do I really want? It could have come across as emotional confusion, or a sense that your future self doesn't quite fit somehow with your past self. But this is part of that process where they are in fact incompatible. And on February 5th, the Sun in Aquarius forms an in conjunction to Jupiter retrograde in Cancer. So the Sun is the next one to make that aspect to Jupiter. And because the Sun is our identity, it is our sense of self, our ego, who I think I am, this aspect is working to dissolve old narratives around our identity, or emotional self-definitions, how we feel about ourselves, or roles that we've identified with and they made us feel safe. And so this aspect can feel like this identity crisis or grief even. It can feel like a sense of, I don't know how to define myself right now. I don't know who I am. I don't know how I relate anymore to myself. And you're slowly detaching from these narratives of who you think you're supposed to be. So this is like no longer anchoring our identity in these emotional stories from her past, right? In our emotional history, and beginning to reorient toward an identity that is not associated with that isn't anchored to that. Now also on February 5th, Mercury squares Uranus, which is stationed direct at 27 degrees of Taurus, and Venus will also square Uranus a few days later on February 8th at that 27 degrees. And this is destabilizing our values, our sense of security, our association with money and worth, and anything that we rely on to feel safe and stable. And when Mercury squares Uranus, this plays out in the realm of information, which are our thoughts being disrupted, or news, any information that we're receiving, arriving very suddenly. It can be something that finally breaks through an old mental pattern, or finally sheds light on a truth of some kind that reworks your narrative. And when Venus squares Uranus, this plays out more in our values, in our relationship dynamics. That there can be a shift. We can have a change in what we value. from this new information, from this new perspective. Our desires are shifting. We're no longer drawn to the same old status quo anymore. And this new sense of honoring who we are becoming is non-negotiable, right? We are not going back. So you can't build your future on the same value system with the same old thought patterns and the same old status quo of the past. So it's a liberation from that stagnation, and that is serving what is being created. Now, on February 6th, we have Mercury entering into Pisces. And traditionally, Mercury is in detriment and fall in Pisces. And that's because Pisces is not a linear sign. It doesn't follow the linear approved standard. So in Pisces, information now becomes much more symbolic. How we arrive at meaning and how we understand meaning is not through something linear. So this will come through things like images or feelings or symbols or archetypes, anything more abstract and nonlinear. And it can feel uncomfortable if you make demands on that and try to force it into something that is very, very clear, that is completely logical and linear, and is meeting some sort of a timeline or external constraint. Then it becomes very uncomfortable. But the strength here with Mercury in Pisces is this archetypal perception. So Mercury in Pisces can sort of sense what is ending. It can feel patterns. It can feel things emerging. It can work to translate something that is entirely non-logical or non-linear. And it has this very innate and internal understanding of meaning well before there's any external form put to that meaning. So this actually fits very well with this week's theme of dissolving these external old status quo forms in order to access and birth a new, deeper understanding. And we also still have that Saturn at 29 degrees of Pisces ending a cycle, because Saturn here is at the final degree. It is saying you have learned everything you can from this form. It's time to let it go. And this is the collapse now of these old spiritual, old emotional structures. And Pisces is holding this space for a new meaning to be born, a new meaning to arise. Then on February 10th, we have Venus entering Pisces, and Venus is exalted in Pisces. So she's very, very comfortable here. This is where beauty starts to return, and Venus in Pisces is saying love is unconditional and it doesn't need justification, and meaning can stand on its own. It doesn't need external validation. It doesn't need to meet a quota. It doesn't need to be productive. And worth is something you only find inside. And here we take this unrestricted internal experience of Pisces and begin to create beauty from it. And this can look like art, music, ritual, some kind of spiritual devotion or practice, a high amount of compassion, being more gentle towards yourself and others. And Venus in Pisces helps us to build a more beautiful internal world that is not based on being useful. It's not based on anything external. It is simply just meaningful to us. So this week, meaning isn't something that is coming from anything external right now, anything outside. It is a deep listening inward and a deep reorienting to our own sense of meaning. So if you're wondering how to best work with the energies this week, don't rush to define anything. Don't force it to fit external definitions. If you feel and sense something wanting to dissolve, like a belief or an identity of some kind, let it. It doesn't need to be replaced right away. If confusion is showing up, that is simply just Mercury in Pisces doing its job. And just allow that. Allow less definition externally, and trust without needing external validation or proof. Just trust your internal sense of meaning, even if you can't explain it just yet. Now, I hope that is helpful. Thank you so much for listening in, and I will be back next week with another episode.